Hello, in this video, I'm going to talk about osteoporosis and exercise recommendations for people with osteoporosis. So first, let's talk about what is osteoporosis. So it's severe loss of bone mass caused by increased bone resorption. So we have four types of cells in our bone tissue, and two are especially relevant here. So osteoclasts and osteoblasts. Any cell that ends in blast means it's a builder cell, and any cell ending in clast means it breaks things down. So osteoclasts break down bone tissue, and osteoblasts build new bone tissue. So both are working in tandem all throughout our lives to remodel our bones. So think about, like, if you're going to remodel your kitchen, you can't just go and put in all new appliances. You have to first remove the old ones. Okay, so the osteoclasts are removing the old bone tissue, and the osteoblasts are laying down new bone tissue and together they're remodeling the bone. So that is happening throughout our lifespan. Now, different hormones and different exposures or lack of exposures will cause osteoblasts to work more or osteoclasts to work more. So if osteoblasts are working more than the clasts, then they're going to build more bone. And sometimes that's good. It might be like increasing bone density, or it could be bad, like causing a bone spur. And then osteoclasts, if they're working more than the osteoblasts, then they're breaking down the bone more than it's being built. And so over time, that's going to reduce and reduce and reduce our bone density. So in osteoporosis, it means that we have more bone resorption, meaning the osteoclasts are outweighing the work of the osteoblasts. And so progressively over time, we are losing bone density and bone mass. And when it gets to such a severe point, we call it then osteoporosis. So what is osteopenia? Basically, it's like pre-osteoporosis. So it's a less severe form of osteoporosis. So in this case, bone mass is less than normal, but it's not as severe yet as full osteoporosis. So osteoporosis and osteopenia are rated using T-scores. So if we look at our bell curve here, okay, everything from -1, that's right here, and to the right is normal. Okay, so of course, we want to be far to the right. We want to have high bone density, high bone mass. So we want to be, closer to 0 and into the positive. But at -1 is the threshold here. So osteopenia is between -1 and -2.5. That's right here. So this range means that bone mass is below what we want it to be, and we would call that osteopenia. Then if bone mass continues to decline beyond that, and we get to a score of -2.5 or less, then this little tail is where osteoporosis would be diagnosed. Okay, so treatment for osteopenia or osteoporosis. Exercise is significant. So exercise alone can lead to a 5 to 10% improvement in bone density. Then on top of that, the person hopefully is also receiving other types of treatments. Calcium and vitamin D supplementation are at the top of the list. That is because calcium is necessary for bone density. So we need calcium in our blood. We use calcium for all sorts of things, including muscle contraction and heartbeat and all kinds of things. So we need blood calcium. If our blood calcium is dropping, then we take that calcium that we need to keep our blood calcium high enough. We steal it from the bones to keep our blood calcium high enough. So if we're not getting enough calcium, then we're just going to keep drawing from our reserves that we have in our bone tissue. Then on top of that, vitamin D is necessary to absorb calcium. So even if somebody is taking in plenty of calcium, if they don't have enough vitamin D, then they're not absorbing enough calcium, and they're still going to end up with low blood calcium and therefore declining bone density. Okay, so first, first and foremost is going to be calcium and vitamin D, but then there are other hormone replacements and medications and things that, depending on what is the suspected cause of the low blood calcium or the low bone density, depending on the cause, there might be different treatment options that they might use. But calcium and vitamin D are definitely at the top of the list. Now, even if we have calcium and vitamin D, we still need exercise to cause the calcium to remineralize in the bones. So we need stimulus to cause the bones to become stronger. So that stimulus, just like how we need exercise to make muscles stronger because we need a stimulus on the muscles, we need a stimulus on the bones to make them stronger too. And that stimulus comes in the form of gravity. So that's why weight-bearing activity is so important. So gravity on the bones is a stimulus. And then also the pull of our skeletal muscle on the bones, that is a stimulus on the bones to make the bones get stronger and improve their bone density. So we need the materials to increase the bone density. So that would be the calcium and the vitamin D. But then we also need a stimulus to tell the bones to increase in density. So exercise is really important. So the exercise recommendations are very similar to all healthy adults. But we want to especially emphasize weight-bearing activity. Again, gravity is an important stimulus. So like swimming, for example, is not going to be the best choice of activity for improving bone density. So you want it to be weight-bearing, but you also need to be aware of fall risk. Especially in advanced osteoporosis, they might fall and fracture something. They're going to be more prone to fractures if they do fall. And so you need to especially be careful about fall risk. So weight bearing, but be selective and be careful about the context and how you're delivering that exercise. You also want to be careful about spinal flexion and rotation, especially at the same time, and avoid ballistic movements. Now, for increasing bone density, you want to make sure that you are loading the bones from all different directions because they're specifically going to increase in density in the direction that the force is applied to the bones. So the more variety you can give in terms of stimulus and direction of force is applied, the more parts of the bone and the more density that you'll help the person develop in the different directions. You also want to avoid repetitive exposure. So like running, for example, well, for the first stretch, that high impact is going to be a stimulus to increase bone density, but the bones become desensitized essentially when we're experiencing that impact repetitively. They become desensitized as we continue to have that same repetitive force. And so the more we can vary that force instead of having the force be repetitive, the better. And I'm not suggesting that someone with osteoporosis should be running, but I'm using that to illustrate the point of how bone density is developed. So in people without osteoporosis who are trying to still increase and maintain bone density, and they are able to run safely, then keep that in mind, that running, at least in the initial part, will help. But as we go on through that session, it's going to provide less and less stimulus. So in osteoporosis, you also want to focus on loading joints, so strengthening and improving bone density in the joints that are at the greatest risk for fracture, like the hip, wrist, and low back. Exercise should be long-term and progressive. So this isn't something that they can do for a month and improve. This is something they need to do for the rest of their lives. And so it needs to be long-term and gradually progress over time so that as they are improving their bone density, their exercise and the stimulus to produce more bone density is going to continue to increase. And so it has also been found that in osteoporosis and osteopenia, they might receive more benefit by breaking up their exercise and having it over the course of the day rather than doing all of their exercise at once. And that's likely because we do become desensitized when we're having repetitive forces. But if you have a break and you do it again later in the day, then that becomes a new stimulus and you're going to build more bone density in response. All right. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.